Rain was falling hard as Lena ran through the busy city street. Her shoes slipping on the wet ground, her heart beating like a drum in her chest. She could hear her name being shouted behind her, Jake's angry voice echoing through the noise of cars and thunder. She did not dare to look back. She just kept running, hoping the crowd would hide her. Her breath was short and shaky. Her clothes were soaked. Her mind screamed only one thing. Keep going. Don't stop. Not now. Not when she was so close. To being free, she turned a corner and almost slipped, her hands grabbing the wall for balance. She had left her apartment with nothing but her bag and her fear, and now she was running through the rain like a lost soul. Jake had always been charming. At first everyone said he was the perfect boyfriend, but Lena knew the truth behind that smile. He controlled everything: who she talked to, what she wore, where she went, and every time she tried to pull away, he pulled her back with sweet words that turned into shouting and guilt. She had thought she could escape quietly tonight, but Jake had found her before she could get on the bus. She looked over her shoulder and saw him pushing through the crowd, his face red with rage, her stomach twisted. In panic, she turned again and almost ran into a tall man standing beside a black car. He looked like he had just stepped out of an important meeting, wearing a dark suit with a phone in his hand, his face calm, serious, and cold. Without thinking, Lena ran straight to him. She grabbed his arm tightly, her fingers trembling. She whispered, fast and desperate, "Please help me. Please pretend you know me. Please, just for a moment." The man looked at her with sharp gray eyes that seemed to see everything. His brows lifted slightly, but he said nothing for a heartbeat. Then he placed his arm around her shoulders and turned toward Jake. Jake stopped a few feet away, his chest rising with anger, his eyes moving from Lena to the stranger who was now standing. Beside her, the stranger's voice was deep and steady. "She's with me." He said the words were quiet, but they cut through the sound of the rain like thunder. Jake blinked, confused for a moment, his mouth opening but no words coming out. Lena felt her, knees weak, and the man's presence was powerful, like someone who was used to being obeyed. Jake glared at him, then at her, and finally muttered something under his breath before walking away into the dark street, his footsteps fading into the distance. Lena's shoulders dropped. She finally let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The man looked down at her, his arm still around her. She stepped back quickly, embarrassed. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to grab you, I just didn't know what else to do." He studied her face for a moment, then said calmly, "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Just scared," she whispered. He nodded slowly, his expression softening, just a little. His voice stayed quiet. "But, you shouldn't walk alone right now. Come on, I'll drive you somewhere safe." She hesitated, looking at the sleek car behind him, its windows dark, its doors shining under the rain. She didn't know him at all, but something in his voice made her believe him. Inside the car, the world felt silent. The rain tapped against the glass as the city lights blurred outside. He didn't speak for a while. Neither did she. Her hands clutched her bag tightly, her heart still racing. Finally, he asked, "Who was that man?" Lena looked down at her hands, her voice barely a whisper. "My ex. Someone who doesn't understand, no." He didn't ask more. He just nodded and told the driver to keep going. His phone buzzed once, but he didn't look at it. For the first time in months, Lena felt like she could breathe. The car moved smoothly through the streets, and she stared out the window, wondering who this man was. When the car stopped in front of her small building, she turned to him. "Thank you for helping me. I don't know what would have happened if you weren't there." He reached into his jacket and handed her a small black card, his voice calm and low. "If he comes near you again, call this number." She looked at the card, then at him. The name printed in silver letters made her blink. Damian Cross, CEO of Cross Enterprises. The name sounded familiar. She had seen it on news channels, on magazine covers, the mysterious billionaire everyone talked about, but rarely saw. She looked up and found him already, watching her, his gray eyes unreadable. "You really didn't have to help me," she said softly. He gave a faint smile, almost like he wasn't used to smiling, and replied, "Maybe not, but you looked like someone who needed saving." Then he nodded to the driver, and the car disappeared into the night, leaving her standing in the rain holding the card. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, still shaking. She closed the door and leaned against it, her mind spinning. Who was he really? And why did he help her? She placed the card on the table and stared at it for a long time. Outside, the storm grew louder, the thunder echoing through the city, and somewhere far away, a man in a dark office stared at his phone, his assistant asking quietly, "Sir, should I cancel tomorrow's meeting?" Damien Cross said nothing, his eyes fixed on a photo on his screen, the image of a frightened girl grabbing his arm in the rain, and for the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't felt before: curiosity. The next morning, the city was calm, but Lena's heart was not. She had barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the moment she had grabbed the stranger in the rain. His steady eyes, his calm voice, the way he said, "She's with me," like it was the easiest thing in the world. She sat by her window, the small black card on the table in front of her, the name still shining faintly under the morning light. Damien Cross, CEO of Cross Enterprises. She whispered the name to herself again and again, wondering why it sounded so powerful. She had seen that name before in the news, on television, on giant buildings that touched the clouds. People said he was a genius, a man who built an empire before he was 30, but also cold, distant, someone who trusted no one and spoke little. She could not understand why a man like that would stop and help a stranger like her. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her jump. It was Jake. His name flashing on the screen again and again. She froze, her fingers trembling. She didn't answer the call, but the message that followed made her blood run cold. "You can't hide from me, Lena. I will find you." She dropped the phone, her heart beating fast, her breath shaking. There was a knock on the door and she flinched. She hesitated, then opened it slowly. Her neighbor, Mrs. Carter, stood there holding a small bag of groceries, smiling kindly. "You left your door unlocked last night, dear," she said softly. "You should be careful. There are strange people out there." Lena smiled weakly and thanked her, but inside she knew the strange person she feared most wasn't out there. He was already looking for her. As soon as Mrs. Carter left, Lena locked the door tightly. She sat down again, staring at the card. Should she call him? She didn't want to bother him, but she remembered his voice, steady, calm, and protective. "If he comes near you again, call this number." She picked up her phone and dialed before she could change her mind. The call rang only once, before a deep voice answered. Lena froze for a moment before whispering, "It's me, the girl from last night." There was silence, then his voice softened. "Are you safe right now?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I think he's watching me." His voice changed, firm and certain. "Stay where you are. I'm sending someone." 15 minutes later, a black car stopped in front of her building. A tall man in a suit stepped out and knocked on her door. "Miss Lena, Mr. Cross asked me to take you somewhere safe." She hesitated, but something inside her said to trust him. She grabbed her bag and followed him to the car. The ride was quiet, her eyes watching the tall buildings pass by as the city grew brighter and cleaner. The car finally stopped in front of a tower so tall it seemed to touch the sky. The guard at the door bowed as they entered inside. Everything was glass and marble, shining like a dream. The man led her to a private elevator and pressed the top floor. When the doors opened, Damien Cross was waiting, standing near the giant window overlooking the city. He turned slowly, his gray eyes locking on hers. He looked the same as last night, calm, unreadable, his voice low and smooth. "You called good, that means you listened." Lena felt small in front of him, like a child in a world she did not belong. "To thank you for sending your driver," she said, her voice quiet. He nodded and motioned to a chair. "Sit." He said. She sat down carefully, her eyes wandering around the room. Everything looked expensive but simple, clean lines. No color, only silver and black. He leaned against his desk, watching her. "You said he's still after you." She nodded, her fingers twisting together. "I don't know what to do. I can't go home. I can't go to work. He'll find me anywhere." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes studying her like he was trying to read her thoughts. After a moment, he said quietly, "You need protection, and I have a feeling you won't accept money or guards." She looked up, surprised. "How do you know that?" He smiled faintly. "Because you're stubborn. He said you ran into me without thinking. That tells me enough. She almost smiled for the first time in days, but then her face fell. I don't want to cause trouble for you, she said softly. You already have enough to deal with. He looked out the window, his reflection sharp against the glass. Maybe trouble is what I need, he murmured almost to himself. He turned back to her and said, You can stay here for a few days until things calm down. I'll make sure he can't reach you. Lena blinked unsure. If she heard right, stay here in this place, she asked quietly. He nodded. You'll be safe here, and I don't like unfinished business. The way he said it sent a strange chill through her. She didn't know if it was fear or comfort. She thanked him and followed his assistant. To a guest room, the room was bigger than her whole apartment, soft white bed, tall windows showing the whole city below. It felt unreal. When she was alone, she walked to the window and looked down at the glowing streets, thinking about everything that had happened in only 24 hours. A normal life turned upside down. A stranger who turned out to be one of the most powerful men in the country. And now she was staying in his home, in another room. Damien stood by his desk, his assistant speaking quietly about a meeting he had to attend, but Damien wasn't listening. His mind was on the frightened girl he had seen last night, the way she grabbed his arm, her eyes full of fear. Something about her felt familiar, though he couldn't explain, while he looked out at the city below and whispered to himself, I don't believe in coincidence, not anymore. And somewhere deep down he knew Lena Walker had just changed everything. The night was quiet inside the tall glass tower. The city lights below looked like stars fallen to the ground. Lena stood near the window, watching them, trying to believe this was real. Just one night ago, she had been running through rain and fear, and now she was standing in the home of Damien Cross, the man the world called the coldest billionaire in the country. She could still feel the warmth of his gaze from earlier when he had said she would be safe here. His voice had been calm and firm, like a wall no one could break, but behind those gray eyes there was something else, something hidden that made her wonder who he really was. The sound of soft footsteps made her turn. Damien stood at the door, dressed in a dark shirt, his jacket gone, his sleeves rolled up, his voice quiet. You should eat something. You haven't eaten all day. She hesitated but nodded. He led her to a small dining area where a warm meal was waiting. She sat down, feeling shy, unsure if she should even be there. He sat across from her, silent for a while before saying, I looked into your ex. He has a record of harassment complaints. He paused, his tone sharper. He won't touch you again, not while I'm here. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. You looked into him? She asked softly. He nodded. I like to know what kind of danger I'm dealing with. She looked down at her plate, feeling both grateful and scared. Why are you helping me? She whispered. He leaned back, his eyes steady on hers. Because you asked for help, and most people never do. The air between them grew heavy. She didn't know what to say after that. Later, when she finished eating, he walked her back to the guest room before leaving. He stopped at the door and said softly, Lock your door tonight, just in case old habits die hard. Then he left, his shadow disappearing down the hallway. Lena lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She wanted to sleep, but her mind wouldn't rest. She kept thinking about the man behind those unreadable eyes and what kind of life he lived. Someone so rich, so powerful, yet so alone. The next morning, sunlight filled the room. She got up and found a note on the table. Come to the office when you wake up. Damien, the handwriting was neat, sharp and elegant. She followed the directions until she reached a large office at the end of the hall. He was there already, sitting behind his desk, reading something on his tablet. He looked up as she entered and motioned for her to sit. I have an idea, he said simply. She frowned. What idea? He placed the tablet down and stood up, walking around the desk toward her. You said you can't go home, you can't go to work, and you can't live like this forever. She nodded quietly. His gaze softened for a moment, then turned firm again. I can protect you, but I'll need something in return. Her eyes widened. What do you mean? He smiled faintly. It's not what you think, he said. I have a problem with the media lately. They say I'm cold, ruthless. Unfeeling investors are starting to believe it. I need to fix that image. You see where I'm going. With this, she shook her head slowly. Not really. He leaned closer and said, You'll pretend to be my girlfriend." Her heart skipped a beat. She stared at him, unsure if he was serious. He continued calm and clear. "It's only for a few weeks we'll attend events together. Charity dinners, public meetings, and the press will believe I'm a changed man, kind, caring, and human in return. I'll make sure your ex never comes near you again. He'll be too afraid to even breathe the same air." Lena blinked, trying to process his words. "Pretend to be your girlfriend," she repeated. He nodded. "Exactly. It's a simple deal. No strings attached." She hesitated, her hands fidgeting in her lap. What if someone finds out it's fake? He smiled, a small, confident smile that made her heart twist. "Then we'll act better." She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The idea was crazy, and yet the way he said it made it sound logical. She thought of Jake, his angry face, his threats, the fear that followed her everywhere. Maybe this was the only way to finally feel safe. She looked up at Damien, his expression calm but his eyes almost gentle, and asked, "Why me?" He was silent for a long moment, then said, "Because you're the first person who ever looked at me like a person, not a story, not a headline that's rare." Lena, her breath caught. She didn't know what to say to that. She nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." He extended his hand, a businesslike gesture. "Deal," he said. She shook it. His hand was warm, strong, steady, like someone who never lost control of anything. As their hands touched, she felt a strange shiver. Not fear, but something else. Something she couldn't name when he let go. He said quietly, "We'll start tonight. There's a charity event at 7 where, something formal. I'll have my assistant arrange it." She nodded again, still in disbelief. He gave a small nod of approval, then turned back to his desk, already moving on to his next call. Later that evening, Lena stood in front of the mirror in a soft silver dress. She hardly recognized herself. She looked elegant, fragile, like someone who belonged in his world. But deep down, she still felt the same scared girl running through the rain. When the elevator opened, Damien was waiting, dressed in black, his tie perfect, his eyes unreadable. He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "You look beautiful." She blushed, unsure how to respond. He offered his arm. She took it slowly, and together, they walked toward the waiting car. Cameras were already flashing outside the door. And as they stepped into the light, Lena realized there was no turning back from this moment onward. She was part of his world, a world of secrets, power, and danger. And somewhere deep inside, both of them, something had already begun to change. The cameras flashed like lightning as Damien and Lena stepped out of the car, his hand gently resting on her back, guiding her through the sea of reporters shouting questions. His face calm and unreadable, hers pale but brave, trying to hide the storm inside her heart. They walked into the grand hall filled with golden lights, music, and eyes that watched every step they took. Everyone wanted to see the mysterious billionaire who had finally brought someone to his side. People whispered as they passed, "Who is she? How did she catch his attention?" Damien ignored the noise, his hand never leaving hers. Lena tried to smile. Though her stomach was twisting in knots, she could feel every stare burning through her, but when she looked at Damien, his calm presence made her breathe again. They reached the center of the hall where the host greeted them warmly. "Mr. Cross, so glad you could come, and who might this lovely lady be?" Damien's voice was smooth. "This is Lena Walker. She means a lot to me." The crowd buzzed with surprise, his words soft but full of weight. Lena blinked up at him, pretending to smile, but her heart jumped for real at the way he said it. Throughout the night, Damien played his role perfectly. He introduced her to people he barely tolerated, smiled for photos, laughed softly at questions, and every time someone came too close, he moved just enough to keep her within the safe circle of his arm. The way he protected her without saying a word made her feel something she couldn't name. As the evening went on, she started to relax. She found herself laughing once or twice when he whispered something dry and clever to her ear. He wasn't just cold. She realized he was observant, careful. Every word he spoke carried purpose when she thought no one was watching. She looked at him, secretly studying his face, the sharp lines, the steady eyes, the quiet control, and she wondered what kind of man hid behind all that strength. When they left the event, it was late. The streets were quiet and the air cool inside the car. Lena leaned against the window, exhausted. Damien looked at her reflection in the glass and said softly, "You did well tonight." She smiled faintly. "I just followed your lead." He looked forward again. "You looked more confident than most people in that room." She laughed a little. I was terrified. He turned to her. Then his gaze softer than she had ever seen it. "Fear looks good on you," he said, his voice almost teasing, but his eyes told a different story. Back at the penthouse, she changed out of the dress and walked out to the balcony. The city lights below shimmered like fireflies. She leaned on the railing. Breathing the night air for a moment, she felt peaceful until she heard his voice behind her. "Can't sleep." She turned and found Damien standing there in a white shirt. His tie gone, his hair slightly messy. He looked more human than she had ever seen him. She shook her head softly. Too many thoughts. He stepped closer and leaned on the railing beside her. "What kind of thoughts?" She hesitated before answering. "Thoughts about how strange life is. Yesterday, I was running from my ex, and now I'm pretending to be the girlfriend of a man I barely know." He smiled. Faintly, fate has a cruel sense of humor. She nodded. "Maybe, but thank you for helping me." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable, before saying quietly, "Don't thank me yet." The silence between them stretched, carried by the sound of distant traffic. Lena finally asked, "Do you always hide behind that cold mask?" Damien looked out at the city, a slow breath leaving him. "Maybe it's not a mask. Maybe I just forgot how to be warm." She frowned. "What made you forget?" He didn't answer. Not right away. Then he said, "When people see money, they stop seeing the man. That's all you need to know." Lena wanted to say something, but before she could, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, his face darkening. He muttered something under his breath and turned away. "I have to make a call," he said. She nodded and watched him disappear into the next room. She waited a few minutes, then went back inside. But the air felt different now, heavy like a storm waiting to break. From the other side of the door, Damien's voice was low and sharp. "I told you to stay quiet about that report. Yes, I don't care what it costs. Handle it." He hung up and stood still, his jaw tight, his mind racing. There were things about his company that no one could ever know. Not yet. Not even Lena. Especially not her. Later that night, Lena was half asleep when she heard something outside her window. A soft scraping sound like footsteps. She got up quickly, her heart pounding, and pulled the curtain aside. Nothing there, just the wind. She tried to calm down, but unease filled her chest. She decided to tell Damien in the morning. The next day came too soon. Damien was already gone. His assistant told her he had a meeting out of town. She felt strangely empty without his presence. She spent the day walking around the large apartment, noticing details she hadn't before: photos of buildings, projects, awards, but not a single personal picture, not one of family or friends. She realized how lonely his world must be. That evening, she stood again on the balcony watching the sunset, wondering what kind of secret Damien Cross was hiding, and why the thought of losing his trust suddenly hurt more than it should have. Meanwhile, miles away, Damien sat in his car watching a man across the street. The man was Jake, Lena's ex. He was meeting someone in a dark alley. Damien's eyes narrowed as he whispered to his driver, "Follow him," because Damien Cross had just realized this was not over. Not yet. The night was heavy with silence. The car moved slowly through the dark streets, following the man who had once made Lena's life a nightmare. Damien sat in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the figure ahead, his hand resting against his chin, his thoughts sharp and cold. He had seen many kinds of men, but Jake was the kind who hid behind charm and violence, the kind Damien had no patience for. The driver spoke softly. "Should we confront him, sir?" Damien shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see who he meets first." The car stopped a short distance away. They watched as Jake turned into a narrow alley where another man waited, a tall, shadowy figure wearing a dark coat. They spoke quickly, voices too low to hear. Then the man handed Jake a small envelope. Jake nodded and walked away. Damien's jaw tightened. He hated secrets, and whatever that exchange was, it smelled of danger. The next morning, Lena woke early. The sunlight warm against her face, she walked into the kitchen still wearing the soft robe Damien's assistant had brought her. She made coffee, trying to fill. The silence, but something in the air felt strange, too. Quiet, too still. She turned when the elevator door opened. Damien stepped out, his face unreadable but his eyes darker than usual. "You left last night," she said softly. He nodded. "I had business to handle." She frowned. "You mean my ex don't worry about him anymore?" Damien said, his voice firm. "He won't trouble you again." The way he said it sent a chill through her. Not from fear, but from the unknown. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned away. "Some things are better not to know." She stared at him, her heart uneasy, but before she could ask again, his phone buzzed. He answered it quickly, his tone low and sharp. "Yes, I'll handle the press release myself." He hung up and muttered something about reporters before walking to his office. Lena followed slowly, watching how tense his shoulders were. Something was bothering him, something bigger than Jake hours. Later the news hit every channel. Billionaire, Damien Cross under investigation for illegal business deals. The words flashed across the screen. Lena's hands shook as she turned up the volume. The report showed photos of Damien leaving buildings, headlines shouting cold tycoon hiding dark secrets. Her chest tightened. None of it made sense. When Damien came out of his office, his phone was ringing nonstop, his assistant pale behind him. "Sir, they found old files linked to your former partner." She heard her name in that mess too. "It was Jake, sir." Damien froze. "What did you say?" The assistant swallowed. "Jake Turner. He's claiming you forced him out of Cross Enterprises years ago, that you destroyed his life, and now he wants justice." Lena felt the ground vanish beneath her. That name again, Jake. He was everywhere, even here. Her voice trembled. "Jake worked for you?" Damien turned slowly, his expression dark as a storm. "Yes, he did. Once upon a time he betrayed me and stole from the company. I had to fire him. He disappeared after that. I thought it was over." Her heart pounded. Everything started to connect. Jake's anger, his obsession, his need for revenge. He wasn't just angry because she left. He wanted to hurt Damien too, and maybe she was the easiest way to do it. Damien walked to the window, his reflection cold against the glass. "I should have known he would crawl back someday," he said quietly. Later that evening, the building was surrounded by reporters, shouting questions, throwing cameras forward. Lena tried to stay calm, but fear clawed at her chest. Damien stood beside her, shielding her from the flashing lights, his voice low. "Ignore them. They feed on lies." She looked up at him, wanting to believe him, but doubt crept into her thoughts. What if Jake was telling the truth? What if Damien really had ruined him? Inside the safety of the penthouse, she turned to Damien and asked the question that had been burning inside her. "Did you hurt him?" He froze, his jaw tightening, his voice low. "I told you not to ask." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. "Please, I need to know, did you destroy his life?" His silence felt louder than any answer. Finally, he spoke, his tone soft but sharp. "I did what I had to do to protect what I built. He stole from me, lied to investors, and nearly cost hundreds of people their jobs. If that makes me the villain, then so be it." She swallowed hard, unable to tell if she felt fear or sadness. The night stretched long. Lena couldn't sleep. The headlines replayed in her head, every whisper, every rumor. She looked out the window, wondering if she had made a mistake trusting him. When she turned, she saw Damien standing in the dark doorway, watching her, his face unreadable. "You think I'm a monster?" he said quietly. She shook her head. "I don't know what to think." He stepped closer, the city light catching the edge of his face. "Maybe you shouldn't think. Maybe you should just feel." She wanted to look away but couldn't. His eyes held her there, caught between danger and safety, between truth and lies. In that moment, her phone buzzed. She looked down and froze. A message from an unknown number read, "He's lying to you. Meet me tomorrow at the old cafe if you want the truth." Her hands trembled. She looked up, but Damien was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She sank to the floor, her heart racing, torn between fear and curiosity. The truth was out there somewhere, and she had no idea which man to trust anymore. The one who saved her, or the one who wanted her to run outside the city lights, flickered like dying stars and far away. A man sat in a dim room holding his phone, smiling. Jake Turner whispered soon, "She will know everything. And when she does, Damian Cross will lose it all." The morning light came slow and cold. Lena sat on the edge of her bed, her phone still in her hand, the message glowing on the screen. "He's lying to you. Meet me tomorrow at the old cafe if you want the truth." Her heart was pounding. She didn't know if it was fear or hope. She had to know, she had to see for herself if everything Damian said was a lie. She waited until the afternoon before leaving. She wore a plain coat and dark glasses, hoping no one would recognize her. The city was loud, full of cars and voices, but her mind was quiet. Only one thought echoing. What if Jake was right when she reached the old cafe? She paused by the door, her hands shaking before she finally stepped inside. Jake was already there, sitting in the corner, his eyes dark, his smile small and tired. He looked different, thinner, worn out, like someone who had been living off anger for too long. He waved her over. Lena sat down across from him, her voice barely a whisper. "Why did you call me?" He leaned forward, his voice smooth. "I wanted to tell you what really happened, what Damian Cross really is." He began to talk, his words pouring out like poison. He said Damian used him years ago, stole his ideas, took credit for his work. And when Jake tried to fight back, he lost everything. His job, his name, his future. Jake's voice shook with bitterness. He said, "Damian didn't just ruin his career, he ruined his life, and now he wanted revenge. Not with violence, but with truth." Lena listened, her chest heavy, her mind torn between belief and doubt. Jake slid a folder across the table, old papers, photographs, contracts, all with Damian's signature. "See for yourself," he said coldly. "The man you trust built his empire by stepping on others." She looked at the papers, her fingers trembling. But something didn't feel right. The dates, the names, something was off before she could ask. Jake grabbed her hand hard. "Listen to me, Lena, you can't go back there. He's dangerous." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "You don't understand," he whispered. "You belong with me, not him. We were supposed to be together before he took you too."